important to Tunisia, both to the business community, but also to the government. Let me explain a little bit about how we see this issue of an FTA, because we do see it differently. First of all, the United States has many FTAs. These have been negotiated over many, many decades now. At the moment, the issue of free trade is politically very complicated in the United States. It's not a simple thing to negotiate a free trade agreement any longer. In the past, these were simple agreements about lowering tariff barriers. More recently, they've become much more complicated, and we've only been able to negotiate them when they include, for example, very strong provisions on workers' rights, on environmental protection, on non-tariff barriers, on intellectual property, and many, many other things. Partly this is because our experience with the early FTAs was we would agree to lower tariff barriers or eliminate tariff barriers, and then find out that there were still problems in accessing foreign markets because of other barriers, because of the situation with labor or the environment. Also in the past, we negotiated some FTAs that were, as we would call them, political FTAs, that we did it for political reasons. Those have also fallen out of favor in the United States. So in order to do an FTA now, we have to justify it based upon the economic merits. So in other words, we don't do it simply because we want to support a particular country. Here in Tunisia, we do very much support what's going on here politically, but in order to do anything on the trade front, it has to be justified economically. From an American point of view, Tunisia is an important market, but it is frankly a small market for the United States. On the other hand, for Tunisia, the United States is a very large market, and potentially it's a huge market. So there's a bit of an imbalance between how we look at things. So it's perhaps not surprising that an FTA is a very high priority for Tunisia. It's not at the moment a high priority for the United States. As the minister said, we're actually negotiating two major trade agreements right now. One is with the European Union, and the second is called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Those involve our largest trading partners in Europe and in Asia, and potentially very large trading partners as well, like China. So our focus at the moment is on those two partnerships, those two negotiations. That's not to say that we would exclude doing other free trade agreements with other partners, but it still, as I said, has to be justified on the merits. It's not simply a question of getting in line. So how would I recommend Tunisia go about this? The Prime Minister is going to be in Washington next week, and he will have an opportunity to talk with the President. And I believe that Ambassador Mike Froman, who's the head of USTR, is also prepared to meet one of the ministers as well, so perhaps one of the other ministers on the delegation will be able to meet with him and talk with him in more detail about it. I think the pathway for Tunisia really runs through the TIFA. This is not a question of you have a TIFA or you have an FTA, it's one or the other. It's really a question of how you go about improving trade and investment between the two countries. The mechanism that exists is the TIFA process. We've had some negotiations, some discussions already. There was an official here last week from USTR. We've agreed, I think, tentatively to have a meeting of the TIFA Council here in Tunis in June. And I think the best way to demonstrate to our trade officials in Washington that Tunisia is serious about improving trade and investment relations with the United States is to work seriously and actively through the TIFA process.